Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again this evening for another conversation from a voice from the margins. We have to apologize. We had a slight internet issue, as you can have from time to time on this great social media platform. But we're here and we're here together, and we're going to have a great show. I'm so honored to have with me tonight a friend and a colleague, someone who I greatly admire, Margaret Kimberly, who is a activist, a writer, an intellectual, what we call a public intellectual, someone who's been bringing to the public for quite some time some of the most insightful analysis out there. And tonight we're going to talk about a recent article that she published, I think just yesterday, in Black Agenda Report, the main outlet for her articles. And we're going to talk for a few minutes, and then we're going to open up the conversation as we always do, for you to provide questions to Margaret this evening. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ajamu.
So, Margaret, before we get into your article, though, let's make sure that people know that you are, in fact, a Green Party supporter, that you voted for the Stein Baraka campaign. Very briefly, can you share with our viewers and listeners what brought you to supporting the Green Party this year?
Well, it's not the first time I voted for the Green Party ticket. I believe it was the second time. But I believed it was very important to once and for all establish that we must leave the Democratic Party. People who call themselves progressive or left, we must get rid of them. We have to replace the Democrats. And it's difficult for people to understand that can be possible. The Democrats are seen as this a force we cannot get rid of, that there have to be just two parties and that we must accept the status quo as it is. But the result of that is we have accepted many things. People who call themselves progressives, we've accepted everything from mass incarceration to imperialism abroad, loss of our civil liberties, police murder, neoliberal schemes of various kinds, and we are silent and just continue because we think we have no choice. Yes. But that's only true if you think you can't ever get rid of the Democratic Party. And we have to get rid of this notion that the Green Party is it's a protest vote, and that it's some kind of political frill. And people were called elitist because they were going to vote Green instead of us knowing that the Green Party is a viable party, and we can use it to replace the Democrats and get out of this trap of the duopoly, where we sign on to things that we say we don't want. And it's time to make good on the beliefs we claim we have and make this party stronger and take it out of this also-ran spoiler status. And it can be done, and I think it can be done within a few years.
I think you're absolutely right, Margaret, and we really appreciate the fact that you are now and have been a Green Party supporter. And as you said, those were the messages that we brought to the campaign, brought to the public here in the U.S., that we have to build an alternative. We have to engage in critical thought. We can't allow ourselves to be used and manipulated by both of these parties, and in particular by the Democratic Party. So, on that notion of having to be critical, of making sure that we are seeing the world the way it really is, you wrote an article that came out yesterday where you are dealing with some very important issues. Some issues we've talked about, we talked about last week. We want to explore again with you this week. The title of your article was Syria, Russia, and American Desperation. Share with us some of your main thoughts and why you wrote that article.
Well, we've reached a very crucial point in Syria, where the United States, starting in 2011, attempted to overthrow the Assad government, the way they had done in Libya, which was destroyed by the United States, a true war crime. And the Russians finally stepped up to the plate last year, gave the Syrians military cover, and have enabled them to start recapturing their country. We've seen the liberation of Aleppo, the terrorists that the United States helped to send into that country being pushed out. And this is creating just desperation from Barack Obama himself and from all of the Democrats. All year long, they have been pushing this propaganda about Russia, about Vladimir Putin, and it's all because Russia will not submit to American domination. It's really that simple. And with only a few weeks to go, with the surprise of Donald Trump winning, he's very unpredictable. You don't know what he really will do, but he has said that he will change the relationship with Russia. And clearly, this is something that has set them into a panic. What seems like a sensible, reasonable thing to say, why can't we have a different relationship, is obviously something that is going to change the world very much, or they fear that it will. And
so when you say, Mark, when you say they, who are you referring to?
The war party, we can call them, Democrats and Republicans, people, John McCain and Barack Obama, who believe that the United States literally has to run the whole world, and that every nation must be an ally or submit. And so we see the president giving this bizarre press conference where he called Russia weak and unimportant, and then told an outright lie. Putin was the head of the KGB, which is nonsense. The Russian success in Syria, which is a good thing for the world, for humanity, to know that people can stand up to the United States, that the United States doesn't have to get its way everywhere. But this is causing great consternation among the Democrats and among Republicans. It's going to be interesting to see what Trump does, because many in the Republican Party are very strongly opposing him. They are, in fact, on board with Obama. And it proves that the duopoly, at certain moments, the Democrats and Republicans work together hand in hand, work together very closely. So we're seeing a very, very interesting time.
Mm-hmm. I find it interesting, Margaret, that you use certain terms. You said that the Russians stepped up to the plate. And I think that some people would then accuse you of being somewhat biased in your analysis, your view, because many people in the U.S. have been told, and many people believe, that the Russians are in fact playing a unproductive role in Syria, and that their presence there is in fact another example, an expression, if you will, of Russian imperialism. How would you respond to that, or what would you say to that critique?
Well, the United States is the country that has troops in military installations in more than 100 countries. I think Russia has them in like 9 or 10 countries. It's the United States that invaded Iraq and killed somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people. It's the United States that destroyed Libya. It's the United States that's trying to destroy Syria, that has kept Somalia from getting out of a decades-long war. So it's the United States that is creating all this havoc and undertaking all this aggression around the world. Russia has been defensive. The United States helped instigate a coup in Ukraine, kicked out the elected president, something Americans always claim to think is important, kicked out the elected president right next to Russia, attempting to expand NATO and European Union right up to Russia's borders. The worst thing you could say that Putin did was he reacted and annexed Crimea. But it was nothing like the U.S. actions in Iraq or Libya.
Well, some people say, Margaret, that the opening up of the front in Ukraine was in fact a second front coming out of the situation in Syria. That is that, because the Russians would not play ball in Syria, then there was agitation on the part of the U.S. government in Ukraine. Now, many of us find it very interesting also, too, that, even after they were able to bring about a coup, where a democratic government was, or democratically elected government was swept out of office, then you had this civil war in which, the folks in the East rose up because that was a base of support for the ejected president. But the central government waged war on their own people in Ukraine. And I found that interesting because at the same time we were being bombarded with the propaganda that Assad was in fact fighting and destroying and killing his own people. When it came to the Ukrainian authorities, it was framed in an entirely different way.
Well, everything that the United States government says it believes in, it doesn't really. And you see it at times like this. They go on about someone being elected until it's somebody they don't like. They'll always use the trope of someone killing their own people until it's somebody they do like killing their own people. So it's a constant stream of lies. And we see it at times like this when the United States decides that it wants to make a change somewhere in the world.
Well, Margaret, we're going to move to the live feed, to folks who are providing questions. We had an interesting question that just came in that is from Daniel, who wanted to know why it seemed like you didn't know that Putin was part of the KGB. I'm not sure what that means, but.
Well, I didn't say Putin wasn't. Putin was an officer in the KGB stationed in Eastern Germany. I know that, but Obama said at his press conference that Putin was the head of the KGB, which is just an outright lie.
Right. Yeah. Margaret, so now there are a number of things happening here in the world, and the Russian propaganda is just one of them. One thing that happened today that I found very interesting too, and I hope the folks have been following this, is that there was almost a vote in the Security Council regarding Israel and the settlements. And interesting enough, the Obama administration gave a signal that they were going to allow that vote to take place in the Security Council. It was a resolution that basically condemned the ongoing expansion of settlements in occupied Palestine. I found that to be a very, very interesting occurrence. Were you following that situation?
I was a little bit. It's something that happens when American presidents are about to leave office. They start to be pretend to be a little bit independent of Israel, but it's always at the 11th hour, and it never really means very much. And I think it's funny when there's all this, essentially there's no proof of Russian interference in the U.S. election, but Israel interferes in American politics all the time, constantly. And
as a matter of fact, they said that Netanyahu contacted Donald Trump to ask him to intercede with Obama to persuade him to, in fact, declare that he would veto the resolution, which many people thought was quite bizarre.
Not when you consider that it's Israel. I don't recall if it's Netanyahu or another prime minister who literally took Bush off the stage. Bush was about to give a speech about Israel, and the prime minister demanded that he leave the stage and get on the phone with him, and he did it. And that was also about a UN Security Council vote. So Israel spies on the United States, attacked a U.S. ship during the 1967 war, killed American sailors. So this is all par for the course for Israel. They get to do anything they want, and generally without much criticism.
We have a few questions we want to, and they sort of they're very varied questions. That is, one question was a little bit off the subject this evening, but is kind of connected in terms of issues of violence, in this case, state violence. And the question is, how can the Green Party, in your opinion, become more effective champions in campaigning, advocating against police brutality in the U.S. that, of course, impacts on Black and brown communities?
Well, I think there has to be a constant demand. This is one of the reasons I gave up on the Democrats entirely. The federal government can prosecute all these killer cops, all of them. They have the power to do it. And it's just a lie to say the bar has to be high and whatever excuses they make. I think it's one of the ways in which we can make a demand and pressure elected officials and remind people that this is something that can be done. And I think we have to call the United States out as a major violator of human rights. The United States loves to point fingers at other countries, but I don't know if there's another country where 3 people are killed by police every single day. On average, it's more than 1,100 people in a year. So I think we also need to use our voice internationally and encourage people all over the world to call the United States out on this ongoing human rights violation that goes on decade after decade.
Tom Cordero asked the question whether or not the Green Party had an official position on the Middle East, and I guess I will respond to that. Of course, there are positions, and the campaign had a position on the Middle East, which was basically that we had to engage in what Dr. Stein referred to as a peace offensive. That the contradictions in the so-called Middle East with the war on terror, that they were not going to be addressed and resolved through military means, and that had to be, that understanding had to be firmly communicated to the people in the U.S. The interventions on the part of the U.S. that, in essence, destabilized the entire region had to be reversed. We have to find a way to bring about a peaceful resolution of the conflicts in places like Syria. We see now that with the events in Aleppo, that now the central government has the ability now to exercise control over its second largest city. Therefore, there may be a more serious attempt to bring about some kind of non-military agreement in Syria, and I think that's a good thing. The situation in Iraq, we have to figure out a way in which we can ensure that there's going to be a strong central government in that country that has legitimacy and is able to exercise sovereignty over all of its territory. Many of us will also argue, including the Kurdish territories. So the U.S. has a role to play in trying to reverse some of the policies that have led to the destabilization of that region. The drone warfare, all of these kinds of policies have to be reversed if there's going to be real order and stability in that part of the world. And that's what we advocated for during the campaign. So the commitment of the Green Party as one of its foundational principles to peace is something that was reflected in the campaign, and it's something I think that all Green Party members should not be shy about advocating for.
Absolutely. Against interventions.
Exactly. Now, Daniel wanted to know why you thought that why wouldn't Putin talk to ISIS?
Why won't Putin talk to ISIS? Well, I would hope he wouldn't talk to ISIS, a creature of the United States making. Putin has said all along that Russia and the United States need to be united in fighting ISIS and other terrorist groups. But that isn't going to work out because the United States, ISIS thrives everywhere where the U.S. has intervened, Iraq, Libya, Syria. So while I agree with him that they should be the target, ISIS is used by the United States as surrogates for the U.S. Instead, the only difference between Bush and Obama is Bush sent troops into Iraq, and Obama knows better than to try it. So he uses forces like ISIS. But it's very important that ISIS be defeated by sovereign governments like Syria, like the government in Iraq. And we're not hearing a lot about what's happening in Mosul, which apparently is a much worse human rights catastrophe, actually, than Aleppo, as bad as Aleppo was.
Yeah, that's very, you're absolutely right, Margaret, and that's very interesting in that we were bombarded with the images of the humanitarian situation in Aleppo, but we have a very similar situation unfolding in Mosul, but yet we're not seeing very many images coming from that fight, and we know that there's over 1 million people who are trapped in that city, and the reality of war is such that there's going to be a tremendous suffering on the part of civilians, but because this is an authorized war, if you will, then the authorities in the U.S. Don't feel compelled to whip up much sentiment regarding the plight of civilians in Mosul.
Yeah, and we see how the corporate media and the human rights industrial complex follow right along with our government. But. Exactly.
Let's switch a little bit, and we'll come back to this international situation. But just very briefly, because our time is rapidly running out. Mm-hmm. We want to talk a little bit about, again, domestic politics. Mm-hmm. We see that many people are, of course, prepared to resist Trump. We saw that there were spontaneous demonstrations across the country. We know that there are plans for mobilization to take place during the inauguration. But we saw some strange sort of signals coming from the Democrats. That is, with this growing opposition across the country, it appeared that the Democrats, who one would think would be the ones who will be most positioned and prepared to resist Trumpism, they began systematically sending signals and obvious comments to Trump that they were in fact willing to work with him. How do you see this, and what does this imply for those folks who still call themselves Democrats, who are concerned about Trump and Trumpism?
Well, I think it makes the case for us that we need a new party. The Democratic rank and file are ready to fight Trump, are concerned about a variety of issues, from Islamophobia to federal judicial appointments, the gamut of issues that people ought to be concerned about. But the Democrats aren't saying anything about those issues. It's all Russia all the time. So their only concern right now seems to be maintaining imperialism. So this is yet another indication that we need to be through with them. And I also believe that as much as people protest Trump, they must also protest the Democratic Party, which lost this election precisely because they did not address the needs of millions of Americans. How do you raise $1 billion and lose? It's mostly because of people who came out before, who finally gave up. Of course, there's always voter suppression. We know about that. But the biggest fault is with the Democratic Party and their commitment to neoliberalism and not even going through the motions anymore of serving the needs of their rank and file. So I think it's very important for people to see the real face of the Democratic Party, that they love the duopoly, that once again, they did it in 2000 with Gore. Gore threw in the towel. They threw in the towel. They didn't even go through the motions of trying to delegitimize Bush and making it difficult for him to pass his agenda once he got in. They are aligned with the Republicans in the duopoly.
Mm-hmm. A question, you've been following the legislation that was introduced by Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii.
Yes.
What's your opinion about that? You think that's going to be something that's going to be able to go forward in terms of cutting off arms to these militant forces in Syria?
Well, I think it's important. There's been no independence shown in Congress. And, people use this word fascism all the time. And one of the hallmarks of fascism is a compliant legislature. And American presidents get their way with Congress. Democrats don't talk back to Obama. Republicans do to a point. But so I'm not hopeful it will go anywhere. But it's important that one member of Congress stood up and opposed what has been American foreign policy orthodoxy for several decades now. And that is the U.S. using these jihadist groups to further its agenda. Let's not forget that bin Laden was once a friend of the United States. The Taliban were America's friends. ISIS were America's friends. So it's important for someone to stay on the floor of Congress to say out loud and in public that this policy needs to stop.
Someone asked the question whether or not, why the Green Party is not taking a similar position. And I guess we have to remind folks that the Green Party and the campaign was very clear about our position on funding these armed opposition groups in the Middle East. That Dr. Stein advocated defunding, advocated a arms embargo. But we know that, these efforts are being supported by the U.S. and all of their intelligence agencies and by a number of their vassal states, in particular Saudi Arabia. So we're hoping that, there's going to be some movement on this legislation. The Green Party has been absolutely clear about where we stand on this issue. We know that you cannot have military solutions to these problems. And we know that when regions and states are flooded with arms from outside of the region, that the only people and the first people who really suffer are, in fact, the innocents.
Yes.
Margaret, as we wind down, we have only a couple of minutes left. Mm-hmm. What kinds of issues should Green Party activists be focused on, or any one particular issue, what should be the main objective of Green Party organizing in the short term?
Well, I think it's important for Greens to run for office at every level of government. I think one of the things that will make people believe that there can be an alternative is to see Green Party candidates for local offices or Congress or the Senate. So I think it's important for Greens to run for office and for Greens to take a stand on, they say all politics are local. So whatever it is, it could be like here in New York, gentrification, this pushing out of thousands of people from their neighborhoods, destabilizing them, fighting against charter schools, fighting against police brutality, always fighting against U.S. interventions abroad, fighting for reproductive rights, one of the issues that Democrats, where they talk a good game, but don't do anything. Pushing in those states where Democrats just ceded control of the Republicans and they've gerrymandered these safe seats because the Democrats simply didn't care. So I would say all of these issues, but I think it's important for the Greens to get out there and for Greens to be heard on everything and to run for office.
Fantastic. I think you're absolutely right, Margaret, that this is very important. It's important for people to run. It's important for the Green Party to strengthen its apparatus. It's important for folks who are following this live feed and who follow Green Party politics to get involved with your local Green Party organization. Because the key is, in fact, going to be organization, an apparatus that can, in fact, serve the public good, that can play the role of an effective opposition, because it's clear that the Democrats are just not able to do that. So, my friends, We appreciate your patience. We know we got a few minutes. We started a few minutes late. We really want to thank Margaret for joining us this evening. We wish we had more time to dig in even more. You know, this time goes by so quick.
It does.
This will be our last live feed for this year. We're going to be taking a holiday vacation, but we intend to be back in January. And we're going to have a whole lot of good information to bring to you, and a lot of very exciting guests who are on the cutting edge of politics in this country and around the world. So again, thank you, my friends. Hope all of you have a happy holiday, and that you take the time to study and get prepared for the good struggle that we have before us. So thank you again, and good night.
Thank you, Ajamu.
Thank you, Margaret.